I never knew. Silence could sound so final. I folded the towel in half, then again, even though the edges were frayed and wouldn't align. It had once been part of a set blue cotton thick, but now it was just something to dry dishes with. There was a small stain near the corner, a faint circle the color of old tea. No matter how many times I washed it, it never quite left. I heard chairs scraping above me, not hurried but measured, and the slight clink of glasses. The basement ceiling was thin. I could tell by the rhythm when someone was setting a table. Not just for dinner, for company, for a photo someone might take. I smoothed my apron across my waist even though I wasn't cooking anymore. The apron had a name stitched into the hem. Dolores. Not embroidered professionally, just done by hand years ago. The red thread had faded to rust. I didn't wear it for show. It just made me feel like I belonged in kitchens. The smell of rosemary floated faintly down the stairs. Stephanie's roast. She always roasted when someone was coming over. The scent curled into corners, then settled on everything like a memory. I climbed slowly. The stairs were narrow and a little warped, creaking under my heels, like they were warning someone I was coming. I paused halfway, adjusted the sleeve on my cardigan, then continued. When I reached the landing, I stood quietly as if waiting for someone to notice. The table was already full. 4 plates. 4 cloth napkins. A flower arrangement in the center that hadn't been there yesterday. Sunflowers and eucalyptus arranged like someone had watched a tutorial. The 4th seat, the one closest to the hallway, was pushed fully under the table. Ellie stood at the counter rolling dough between her palms. Jacob hovered behind her, sleeves rolled, explaining how to pinch the edges of each cookie. She laughed. Her voice still carried that high, clear note she'd had since she was 5. He smiled at her, like she was the only person in the room. Stephanie turned when she heard my steps. She didn't flinch, just tucked her hair behind her ear and tilted her head slightly. "Oh, we weren't sure you'd want to join Dolores." Her tone was warm, wrapped in a kind of gentleness that didn't leave any room for questions. The kind of voice people used when asking if you needed help finding the elevator in a building you once owned. Jacob didn't turn. I pressed my hand to the side of my neck, unsure whether to speak or step back. Instead, I smiled, or something like it. I said I'd just come up to see if they needed anything else. No one answered. Stephanie was already back to slicing lemons. I turned and walked back down the stairs. The overhead lights buzzed faintly. I untied my apron with fingers that didn't quite work, then sat on the edge of the narrow bed. The blanket had slipped to the floor again. I didn't reach for it. My phone chimed. It was a notification from the bank, an automated message confirming a recent change to the mortgage account. Removal of co-signer Dolores M. Whitaker, signature verified. There was a PDF attached. I tapped to open it. My name had been crossed out in clean digital ink. In its place, Jacob C. Whitaker, sole owner. I didn't remember signing anything. The last time I held a pen for something official, it was to write a birthday card for Ellie. I had drawn a tiny sun in the corner. The app let me view the signature. It was mine. The loop of the D was nearly perfect, but it wasn't mine. Not really. I stared at the screen until it dimmed itself. From above, I heard footsteps again, chairs scooting, a burst of laughter. Not mine. Not for me. I thought of the drawer in my nightstand. Inside was a ring box. The velvet had worn thin at the edges, and the hinge clicked softly when it opened. My wedding ring had been tucked there since I sold the bakery. I hadn't worn it in years. Still, I never could bring myself to throw it away. When Ellie called from the top of the stairs, her voice bounced down like a thread I wasn't allowed to catch. "Grandma, why aren't you coming?" I opened my mouth, Nothing came out. Then Stephanie, clearer, closer, said, "She's tired, honey." And that was the last word on it. I looked at my hands. The skin had loosened, drawn with fine lines. There was a mark near the knuckle of my left index finger, a small, round scar from when I'd burned it pulling Jake's birthday cake out of the oven too fast. He had wanted chocolate with blue icing. I remembered the icing more than the smile. The basement light flickered once, then steadied. I picked up the same towel from earlier and folded it again. Not because it needed folding, just because it was something I could still do without asking. The fourth seat upstairs had always been mine. I never asked for it. I never claimed it. I simply assumed it would remain like an old recipe no one dared throw out. But maybe the chair had been gone longer than I realized. Maybe today was just the first time they stopped pretending. I pressed my thumb into the crease of the towel. I didn't cry. I didn't stand. I just sat there thinking about the difference between being forgotten and being erased. They feel the same, but one is louder, and one leaves no trace. Some things don't echo when you step carefully enough. I used to take my coffee with cream and 1 sugar, not too hot. I liked the way the steam curved toward my face, how it felt like morning, even when the clock disagreed. The mug I brought with me had a crack down the handle thin hairline, but it held. I stopped using it after the second week. Stephanie only kept green tea in the cupboard. Rows of neatly boxed bags, mint and matcha, everything sealed tight, like thoughts she didn't want aired. I didn't ask for coffee, I just learned to pour water and wait. The room they gave me had a TV. Flat-screen, wall-mounted remote in a tray beside the bed. It was more than I expected. Ellie would slip in sometimes before bed, still in Sock's book in hand. She liked the corner with the armchair, even though it squeaked when she moved. I read aloud once. She laughed at how I pronounced the character's name, told me I was doing it wrong, then curled beside me anyway. I folded her pajamas when she left. Not because she asked, not because it mattered, but because it felt like something I could still do right. Stephanie had a way of moving around me like I was part of the architecture. Not rude, not warm, just adjusted for. If I stood in the kitchen too long, she'd slide the trash can a few inches closer to the island. If I left the hallway light on, she'd flick it off before speaking. Little things. Efficient things. Jake worked late. Always late. He'd come home in his training jacket earbuds, still in nod once, and head upstairs. He didn't sit with me much. Sometimes he'd glance at the laundry basket and ask if I'd seen his socks. I always knew which ones he meant. There were rules. Not written, at least not at first, but understood. No cooking after 9, no visitors, no background noise during Ellie's violin practice. Stephanie posted a schedule once mealtimes, lights out recycling days. It was laminated. I wiped down the fridge the morning after she hung it. The magnet holding it in place had a tiny crack in the enamel. I turned it upward so the chip wouldn't show. One evening during dinner, Ellie told a story about school, something about a boy who spilled yogurt on her sketchbook. She was laughing. I laughed with her, just a small sound. Jake looked up from his plate. "Mom, I know you mean well, but don't spoil her." He said it flat, like a weather report. Stephanie didn't look up. She refolded her napkin in half twice, made the corners align. Ellie stopped talking. I excused myself before dessert. Later that night, I wrote in the small notebook I kept in my nightstand drawer. The pen skipped twice on the word visible. Maybe I'm too visible. I'll try being smaller. In the mornings, I'd sweep the entryway before anyone came down. Shake out the rug. Wipe the smudges from the glass table. Not because it was my mess, just because I remembered what a clean house felt like when company was expected. I ironed Ellie's school shirts and folded the sleeves inward so they wouldn't wrinkle. I packed her lunch with fruit cut into hearts, sometimes stars. Once I tucked in a note, "You've got this." Stephanie removed it before school. We don't want her depending on praise. I stopped writing notes. The laundry room smelled like lemon and starch. I folded his t-shirts the way I always had, shoulder to shoulder, then in thirds. I never mixed whites and colors, never left lint in the trap. The fabric softener wasn't the kind I would have chosen. It left a film, but I used it anyway. The remote for the TV was too sensitive. A slight touch changed the input, and I once spent 40 minutes trying to get back to the channel I was watching. Eventually, I turned it off and sat still. It was easier. I didn't bring pictures with me, not because I didn't have any, just because I didn't know where I was allowed to put them. Jake used to call on Sundays. Before I moved in, just short calls, updates. Ellie said hi. Stephanie asked if I needed anything. They said it would be good to have me nearby. Easier on everyone. I sold my car, boxed up what mattered, gave the rest away. The cardigan I wore most days had a hole near the wrist. Not torn, just thinned. I stitched it once. It came undone. I wore it anyway. I didn't keep track of time as much as rhythm. The sound of footsteps above me, the clink of dishes after dinner, the weight of water running through the walls during Stephanie's nightly bath. I tried not to interrupt. When the doorbell rang, I waited to see if someone else would answer. When it was for me, Stephanie would call from the top of the stairs. "It's something with your name on it." She never handed it to me. One day, Jake left a form on the counter. Insurance renewal. I saw the section marked household residence. My name wasn't listed. He tapped the counter lightly with his finger. "No need to complicate paperwork, right?" I nodded. I remembered a dress I owned once, pale yellow with buttons up the back. I wore it the day Jake graduated high school. The buttons left marks on my skin from leaning too long on the bleachers. He had hugged me afterward, one arm distracted. Someone else had taken the photo. I never saw it printed. Now I folded hand towels with the edges lined up. I re-washed glasses if they didn't dry spotless. I moved through their home like someone learning a language she once spoke but had forgotten how to conjugate. I didn't speak much. Not because I was quiet, because there didn't seem to be space for sound. Not everything disappears with time. Some things just get harder to find. There's a picture Ellie drew last year, a house with 4 windows and smoke curling from the chimney. The people in it wear stick figure smiles. The tallest one in the middle has brown hair and a triangle skirt. That one used to be me. I kept the drawing folded in the back of a cookbook until Stephanie found it. "Let's keep it in her room," she said. "It'll get wrinkled here." She didn't ask if I wanted it. This year, Ellie made a birthday card that said, "To Daddy and Mommy, love you." It was taped to the fridge in the center, slightly crooked. No one fixed it. I used to mark birthdays on paper calendars. Blue ink for Jake, red for my late husband, green for Ellie. I stopped when I moved here. The calendar they use is digital. No room for pen. Jake got his first pair of real basketball shoes the summer he turned 13. White and navy. He said they felt like clouds. I worked extra nights rolling pastry just to afford them. My fingers ached from the cold butter. He never knew. I didn't tell him. That was the point. Later that season, he scored his first winning shot. I sat in the top row with a thermos of weak coffee and clapped long after the rest of the bleachers quieted. Someone told me I was being loud. When he got the letter about the scholarship, I bought a blouse. Yellow. It still had the tag when I wore it to the award ceremony. I stood when they called his name, clapped too quickly, laughed too loud. He leaned in afterward and said, "Don't make a scene next time." I nodded. We never spoke of it again. There was a housewarming party after they bought this place. Everything smelled like eucalyptus and lemon polish. I helped with the seating chart. At least I thought I did. When the guests arrived, each chair had a small white card in cursive. Stephanie, Jake, Ellie, Grandma, Helen, Uncle Brent, even Kyle, work. There was no card for me. I checked twice, then 3 times. I sat near the end without a plate, used a paper napkin. "Oh," Stephanie said, glancing over. "Must have been a mix-up." She poured wine into the last glass and turned back to the cheese tray. That night, I folded the linen napkins and wrote in my notebook, "They still don't see me, even when I'm sitting right there." Once at a family barbecue, Stephanie passed out handmade coasters as favors crocheted circles with each guest's initials embroidered in the center. Mine read DW, smaller than the rest. "You don't really use coasters, right?" I kept it anyway. "It's in the drawer next to the scissors that stick." There's a cabinet in the living room filled with framed photos, all taken in the last 5 years. Ellie on a swing, Stephanie in a sun hat, Jake at some sports fundraiser. They rotate them seasonally. One fall, I thought I saw my shoulder in the corner of a shot, but it was just a coat rack. I gave them a photo album once. Old prints from when Jake was small, mud on his knees, missing teeth, a birthday cake shaped like a soccer ball. "We don't really have space for extra things," Stephanie said. She left the album by the back door for days until it disappeared. I still remember the sound of Jake's voice when he first read aloud. He held the book too close to his face, lisped through the word elephant. He turned to me and whispered, "I can read now." I bought him a new book that afternoon. It's probably somewhere in a donation bin by now. During a grocery run, Ellie asked if she could get strawberry yogurt. Stephanie hesitated. "Let's not get her used to indulgences," she said. I picked plain instead. Ellie didn't say anything in the car. There was a scarf I wore off in gray with little white feathers. Ellie used to play with the tassels while I read to her. One day it was missing. I found it months later in the garage under a box labeled "Donate." I didn't take it back. I let it go. Jake once told me I was too sentimental. "You hold on to everything," he said. He meant papers, letters, old shirts. He didn't know I was holding on to him. Sometimes at night I run my fingers over the edges of things. The chipped mug. The spine of a book with his crayon marks still faint in the margins. A thimble from my mother. They're quiet objects. They don't demand space. When I touch them, I remember who I was. Not loudly, not proudly, just enough to still know. There's an old box under my bed with items no one's asked about: a dried flower, a gold button, a receipt from the bakery's last day. I don't open it often. Some things disappear more slowly if you leave them closed. Once when I was very young, someone told me the saddest part of being forgotten isn't the silence, it's being remembered wrong. That's what I think about now when I see photos with everyone smiling in matching colors, or hear Ellie repeat something Stephanie said, or pass a framed certificate where my name used to be part of the foundation. I'm not angry, I just don't fit the captions anymore. There's a kind of memory that fades like ink left in the sun. You can almost read it, almost, but not enough to prove it was ever fully there. That's what I've become, I think. Not erased, just unreadable. Some cracks echo more in silence than in sound. I used to keep a small sewing kit in the drawer by the sink. Not because anyone asked for it, just in case a button came loose or a hem needed mending. I hadn't touched it in months. The thread had started to yellow, and the needle had rusted ever so slightly where it curved. The sponge had softened too much. I knew I should have thrown it out last week, but it felt wasteful. I scrubbed the casserole dish gently, letting the warm water loosen what little was left from dinner. Stephanie had left early, saying something about picking Ellie up from a play date. Jake wasn't home yet. Or at least he hadn't been. The front door slammed before I heard the engine. Heavy steps, uneven but fast. The sound of keys being thrown sharp and metallic hitting the counter behind me. I didn't turn. Why are the dishes still here? I placed the sponge down and reached for the towel. I was just finishing. The air behind me shifted fast. A chair scraped backward. I barely had time to brace before his hand hit my shoulder hard. My side struck the corner of the cabinet. Something in my arm lit up and snapped. The noise it made was thin, sharp, like a twig breaking underfoot. I didn't cry out. I think I held my breath too long. The floor came up at an angle. Cold tile pressed against my cheek. I smelled lemon soap and old grease. Then nothing. When I opened my eyes, the ceiling flickered with a soft blue hue. The overhead light buzzed faintly. My left arm felt wrong. Too light and too heavy all at once. Stephanie leaned in close, her perfume sharp and clean. You fell down the stairs. Not a question. I tried to speak, but Her grip on my wrist, the good one, tightened. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. You'll ruin his career. You wouldn't want that, would you? I turned my head slightly. Jake stood near the door, holding a plastic bag of ice against his wrist. His eyes were glazed, unfocused. He didn't look at me. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Stephanie draped a blanket over me, then pressed 2 Tylenol into my good hand. We'll go in the morning. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up in the dark, counting the seconds between the heating system clicks. The throbbing in my wrist came and went in waves. I pressed the wedding ring I still kept in my robe pocket against my knee just to remind myself it was real. The metal had grown dull, but the shape held. At the hospital, the woman at the front desk asked what happened. Stephanie answered. She fell. We think it was the stairs. She's been dizzy lately. I didn't correct her. The nurse helped me into the gown, offered a smile I didn't return. The X-ray room was cold. I sat still while they shifted my wrist onto the plate. Each movement sent new signals of pain radiating down to my fingertips. Dr. Valerie Blake entered quietly. No clipboard, no stethoscope, just a warm cardigan and steady eyes. She didn't touch anything at first. She just looked. Then she asked, "These bruises, how long have they been there?" I looked at the scuff on my shoe, the one I couldn't clean. She nodded slowly. They're different colors, different ages. I didn't speak. She pulled her stool closer, lowered her voice. Did someone do this to you, Mrs. Whitaker? Tears came before I knew they had. Not sobbing, just a slow, steady warmth falling down my cheeks, landing silently on the blanket. I kept my lips pressed tight. You don't have to say yes, she said, taking my hand gently. I'm a mandated reporter. I see enough. She left the room quietly. When she returned, her tone had changed. I've contacted the proper channels. You'll be safe. Safe. The word hung in the air like something foreign, almost antique. Stephanie waited outside, scrolling her phone. She looked up briefly. All set, I nodded. She didn't ask what the doctor had said. Jake wasn't home that evening. Ellie was. She showed me her drawing a rocket ship made of triangles and stars. She pointed to each person drawn inside. This is me. That's Daddy, Mommy, and the dog. There was no fourth figure. I smiled and told her it looked wonderful. That night I sat with a cup of mint tea I hadn't asked for. The bag string dangled off the rim, soaking the side of the mug. The ceramic was chipped, not on purpose. It just had lived long enough. I looked at the clock once. Midnight. Then I looked at my hand, now wrapped in layers of gauze and plaster. My fingers poked out bruised, but still mine. I held my old ring again, turned it in my palm. I considered its roundness, how it promised return permanence, the comfort of things always coming back. But some things don't come back. Some nights don't soften in the morning. I didn't put the ring on, and this time, I didn't put it back in my pocket either. Only departures don't echo until long after you've gone. There's a kind of quiet that doesn't belong to peace. It presses against your skin like humidity, filling the spaces where words should be. Stephanie started bringing the tea herself. Chamomile, no sugar. She didn't ask if I wanted any, she just set it down and left. Some mornings it was already cold by the time I reached for it. I drank it anyway. The cast on my arm itched beneath the gauze. I didn't scratch. I counted the tiles on the kitchen floor instead. 48 if you included the narrow cut one beneath the fridge. Ellie peeked her head around the doorway one afternoon, a paper napkin cupped in her hand. I made cookies. You can have mine. Before I could speak, Stephanie's voice floated down the stairs like mist. Ellie, don't bother her. Grandma needs quiet. The little feet backed away. I never heard them return. Jake hadn't spoken to me in days. He left before sunrise. Came home after dinner. Sometimes I heard him laughing in the living room with Ellie. Sometimes just the television. He never looked at me, not even in passing. The hallway mirror had a smudge on the corner. I left it there. It reminded me that I still noticed things. There was no apology, no explanation, not from him, not from her. Just a careful erasure. One cup, one plate, one glance at a time. I spent the next 3 nights folding and refolding my sweaters. I kept them in the same drawer, then moved them into a canvas tote I'd once used for groceries. I packed 3 changes of clothes, a small tube of hand lotion, a brush with half its bristles missing. I didn't pack my photo albums. Just one picture of Jake from when he was 6, missing his front tooth, holding a soccer trophy. There was a letter Ellie had written 2 months ago, folded into a paper crane. For Grandma, only written in purple marker on the wing. I didn't open it. I just slid it between my folded scarf and paperback Bible. On the 4th night, I sat by the window and watched the porch light flicker. They'd never fixed the wiring. Jake once said it gave the house character. I didn't leave a note on my pillow. I didn't pack the wedding ring. I left it in the medicine cabinet behind a half-empty bottle of aspirin. I did write something on the back of an old grocery list torn at the corner. I placed it on the kitchen counter beneath the salt shaker so it wouldn't blow away if someone opened the back door. Don't worry, I won't be in the way anymore. I didn't sign it. The bus stop was colder than I'd expected. My coat was too thin. I wrapped the scarf tighter, pressing the paper crane closer to my chest. There were 2 others, waiting, one woman with a backpack, a man eating sunflower seeds. No one looked at me. I didn't look at them. When the bus came, I climbed the steps slowly. The driver gave a nod. I nodded back. That was the extent of the welcome. I took the seat by the window 3rd row from the back. I watched the house disappear in reverse, shrinking until it was just another roofline in a row of quiet roofs. I didn't cry. There was a woman 2 seats ahead, humming softly, something without melody. A child behind me kicked the back of my seat twice before falling asleep. The city grew larger with each stop. Streetlights, neon signs, the late glow of laundromats still open. I didn't have a plan. I didn't bring a key to anywhere else. But I had left. That was enough. I thought about the way silence had shifted in that house. How it had once been something we shared over coffee, over Ellie's puzzles, over Sunday mornings without news. And how it had slowly turned into something sharpened and held between them like a fence I couldn't climb. Let's give her space. She's better when she's quiet. She means well, but I learned how to vanish without leaving the room. Now, finally, I'd left the room too. I watched the reflection of the streetlights glide across the window glass like waves. My breath left a faint fog against the pane. I didn't wipe it away. It was the only mark I had permission to leave. The city opened in fragments. Stores with metal grates half closed, a gas station with the lights still flickering, a woman pulling her coat tighter around her child as they crossed the intersection. They didn't look up. Neither did I. My stop wasn't planned. I pulled the cord when the street felt unfamiliar enough. As I stepped off, the driver gave a small nod again. The bus hissed as it pulled away. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, listening. Nothing followed me. Nothing called me back. There was a small diner on the corner, closed, a phone booth missing its receiver, a bench that looked steady enough to sit for a while. I did. The street was quiet in a different way than the house. Not expectant. Not heavy. Just quiet. I reached into the tote bag and felt the folded crane. I didn't open it. I held it like something fragile, not because it would break, but because I might. Some people slam the door when they leave. I didn't. The sound would have been wasted. They'd already stopped listening. Freedom doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, like breath returning. I didn't notice the taste of tea until I chose it myself. The woman at the cafe wore a navy apron and no makeup. She poured the water without small talk, left the bag steeping, and slid the cup across the counter without eye contact. That suited me. The corner table near the window faced a parking lot and a dead tree with plastic caught in its limbs. A man smoked 3 cigarettes back to back 2 tables over. I didn't mind. The smoke stayed outside. The phone buzzed in my coat pocket, though I hadn't given the number to anyone new. The screen was still cracked from when it slid off the bathroom counter months ago. I stared at it, then let it stop. In the lining of my tote bag, tucked between a crumpled tissue and a single glove, I found the card. Pale gray. A line drawn in blue ink across the top. Women's Safe Housing Network. Ask for Carolyn. I hesitated, not because I didn't know what to do, but because doing it meant saying something out loud, even if only to a stranger. The voice on the other end sounded younger than I expected. I'm close by. Can you wait? I told her I wasn't going anywhere. She arrived in a coat too big for her shoulders, her ID badge swinging against her chest like a wind chime. She didn't sit right away. She just stood there, hand resting on the back of the chair across from me. Would you like somewhere safe to breathe? That was all she said. She didn't ask me to explain. She didn't look at my cast. The place she took me to was 5 blocks from a bus station and across from a coin laundry. The building had no name, just a number faded on the mailbox. The elevator didn't work, so we climbed 3 flights in silence. The room was small, just a twin bed, a chair, and a side table. A window overlooked a wall of red brick and a rooftop vent that hissed every few minutes. The bedspread was worn but clean, the corners tucked with care. Someone had thought about neatness. I appreciated that. There were no family photos, no reminder charts on the fridge, no one asking what time dinner should be. No shoes lined up by the door, waiting to be stepped over. Just space, just air. Carolyn pointed to the tea kettle. There's black and peppermint in the drawer. Use anything you need. It's your space now. Then she left. I made the tea that night slowly. Each movement deliberate, lifting the kettle, waiting for the whistle, pouring without spilling. The way the dark leaves swirled in the mug felt like something ancient. Like choosing. I hadn't had black tea in months. Stephanie once called it too bitter, too harsh on the stomach. I sipped and thought, so be it. The cast on my arm was still stiff, though the swelling had gone down. I peeled back the first layer of bandage, just to let the skin breathe, then wrapped it again loosely. I didn't need to be precise. There was no one to correct it. The silence in the room was different. Not the kind that follows a slammed door or comes with held breath. This was empty silence, clean, open, full of potential. There was a small mirror mounted above the sink. It had a crack in one corner, shaped like a branch. I looked at it briefly, not to inspect, not to search, but to acknowledge. I was still there. In the drawer beside the bed, someone had left a single pen and a pad of lined paper. I wrote nothing on the first night. I only opened it and ran my fingers over the paper, feeling the weight of a blank page. I fell asleep on top of the covers, clothes still on scarf, wrapped around my feet like an anchor. The building settled around me, the pipes ticking faintly, the walls creaking like knees rising from prayer. No voices, no orders, just gravity and stillness. The next morning, I washed my face slowly. The towel was thin but soft, the kind that dries by touch more than by fabric. I didn't need to rush. There was no expectation. No one would knock. No one would ask if I'd remembered to pick up dry cleaning I hadn't offered to do. No one would remind me that the thermostat should stay at 68 for budget reasons. I had one bowl, one fork, one spoon. I placed them in the sink carefully after breakfast, then wiped the counter twice, not out of habit, but out of want. The photo of Jake at 6 stayed in my bag. I hadn't taken it out. I wasn't ready. The paper crane from Ellie had a bent wing. I straightened it, then placed it beside the lamp. I didn't open it. It looked better as a secret. The days passed without shape. Morning became afternoon without someone else's footsteps telling me what hour it was. A woman named Judith lived across the hall. She wore her bathrobe to the mailbox and never made eye contact. Once we passed each other in the laundry room. She nodded at my arm and said, "They all think we're fragile. They forget quiet women survive fires." I didn't respond, but I heard her. The window didn't show much, just brick and sky, but I left it open a crack for air. Sometimes pigeons landed on the ledge. Sometimes rain streaked the glass without warning. I didn't keep a clock. I counted time by how long the tea stayed hot. I folded my scarf again one afternoon and thought, this room doesn't know my name yet, but it doesn't reject it either. Later that evening, I lay down with the light still on. I traced the shape of the tea stain on the table beside me. A perfect ring, uninterrupted. My cast itched. My mouth was dry. My hand rested above my heart. "I'm still here," I whispered, though no one asked. Then I added, barely louder than the hiss of the vent, "And this is mine." I didn't need the room to answer. It had already made space. Sometimes absence reveals more than presence ever did. The first headline found me folded in half on the cot, still wrapped in yesterday's clothes. Carolyn had slipped it under the door with a yellow sticky note. "You should know." The article had no picture, just bold letters. In a font too large for the truth, it carried "local athlete under investigation for alleged domestic assault." Below, in smaller print sources, "Confirmed victim is the mother of former All-State basketball player Jake Whitaker." I read it twice. Not because I doubted it, but because it looked like it belonged to someone else's life. There was something too clean about the language. Too sanitized. Later that afternoon, the phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. The first message came soft rushed. "Dolores, please. This is going too far. Whatever this is, it's a misunderstanding. I know you're upset, but airing this in public helps no one." The second came hours later, more pointed. You need to take it back. Ellie's scared. She's hearing things at school. What do you want her to think of you? The third was clipped practiced. People at the club are asking questions. This is damaging. To all of us. I saved each message, then deleted the alerts. That evening, I boiled water and poured it over a tea bag that tore as I dropped it in. The leaves swirled out like smoke in water, staining the mug slowly. I didn't stir. Carolyn brought the envelope on a Tuesday late after most of the others had already gone to bed. She didn't come in, just stood in the doorway, holding the manila packet like it had weight. "From your son's attorney," she said. "You have a right to read it, but you also have a right not to." I nodded once. She didn't linger. Inside, on firm letterhead, were paragraphs dressed in cold civility, Mrs. Whitaker has exhibited concerning signs of cognitive decline. Statements stemming from possible geriatric delusion, potential for fabricated memory due to emotional instability, irreparable damage to Mr. Whitaker's career and family unit. No mention of the cast, no mention of X-rays or medical records. Just bold suggestions about age and confusion, like that could undo bone fractures or bruises that lingered weeks after. I found myself gripping the edge of the envelope too tightly. It creased under my fingers. Under the papers, folded once with uneven corners, was a handwritten note. I recognized the handwriting. Jake never pressed hard on the pen. The ink always looked faded, even when it was new. "You made your point. Now shut your mouth or it'll get worse." There was no signature. He didn't need one. I didn't cry. Instead, I placed the note flat on the table, then reached for the napkin I'd used that morning. A small triangle of orange marmalade had dried along the edge. I wiped the corner of the paper clean. There's a kind of quiet that doesn't come from shock or fear. It comes from knowing finally fully that the person you waited on, protected, forgave, wasn't reaching back. I thought of Ellie. I imagined her at the kitchen table, coloring between the lines the way she always liked to do. I wondered what she'd been told. Probably that Grandma was sick, or confused, or taking a long trip. I imagined her asking, "Did I do something wrong?" and someone replying, "Don't worry about it, honey. She just wasn't well." There had been a drawing once. Ellie had made it with markers, me in a red dress, standing next to a dog that didn't exist, smiling under a sun with sunglasses. She had written, "Grandma, I love you big." Stephanie had placed it on the fridge for one day. Then it disappeared. No explanation. That memory came back now, not as pain, but as evidence. They were rewriting everything. Even crayons weren't safe. I didn't call them. The phone blinked blue again the next day. Another message. This time from Jake, short and clipped. "You're not thinking clearly. You've always been overdramatic. Let this go before you embarrass yourself further. No apology. Not even a denial, just management." I spent the rest of that day folding and refolding a dish towel. It had a small embroidered corner, a mistake from the manufacturer, an extra loop of thread shaped like a question mark. I ran my finger over it again and again. No one came to the door, no police, no reporters, just the mail and the sound of someone down the hall coughing in their sleep. That night I found my old wedding ring at the bottom of the tote. I hadn't worn it in years. The inside still bore the engraving July 18th. Always home. I turned it over twice in my palm and placed it beside the tea mug. Maybe I had been trying to keep a home in people who no longer knew how to offer one. I didn't need them to come back. And now I understood they hadn't come back because they loved me. They came because they couldn't control me anymore. That wasn't loss. That was release. I no longer woke up waiting for footsteps overhead. Instead, I started my mornings by folding the same blue cardigan, the one with a small burn hole on the sleeve. I didn't fix it. Some things, when mended too neatly, forget where they've been. They gave me a journal at the center. A plain one, no flowers, no lines, just thick paper, and a spine that cracked like dry twigs the first time I opened it. Carolyn said it might help. I didn't argue. I wrote. Not everything, just pieces. A half memory of Jake's first day at school, how his backpack dwarfed his shoulders. A description of Ellie's laugh when I once shaped her toast into a heart. I wrote in fragments, like someone brushing dust off a mirror. The center offered a small job. 3 afternoons a week at the public library, helping organize the children's reading corner. I filed picture books, wiped sticky chairs, refilled the coloring bin. No one asked about my past. I didn't offer it. I hung my name tag on the hook every night, like a small act of faith. One day, a girl no older than 8 approached with a green crayon smudged across her cheek. She stood still for a moment, staring. "You're the lady from the newspaper," she whispered, almost like a secret. I looked at her. She held a drawing of a house with no windows. "I'm someone who spoke up." I replied quiet enough that only she could hear. That night, I stayed late and rewrote something I had once scribbled on the back of a grocery receipt. If no one makes room for the quiet ones, they'll go unheard forever. I taped it inside the back cover of my journal and underlined one word: quiet. The next week I met with Carolyn and asked, "What if we started something?" She tilted her head. I placed a piece of paper in front of her. The title, "The Quiet Should Speak," a support circle for girls living in loud homes. It wasn't meant to be revolutionary, just a circle, some markers, soft lighting, and the freedom to speak or not speak. No one had to name anything out loud, just the act of being somewhere safe. 3 girls came the first time. One bit her fingernails. One clutched a plastic pony. The third kept her hoodie pulled over her head, only her eyes visible. We didn't begin with stories. We began with crayons. I don't like when my dad yells, one of them said, almost as if it had slipped out by accident. But when I draw here, I feel safe. I didn't reply. I just passed her a fresh sheet of paper. Sometimes words ruin the moment more than silence does. After the session, I walked home with a folder pressed to my chest. Inside were the drawings from the girls' houses with round windows, stick figures, holding hands, one tree with a red X through it. I passed the bakery I once owned, though the sign now read Laura's Crumbs. The bell on the door chimed faintly as someone walked in. I didn't pause. I had nothing to reclaim there. A few days later, I found a small card tucked in the return bin at the library. On the front, a bluebird in flight. Inside, "Thank you for making room for us." No name, just a penciled heart. I placed it between the pages of my journal where I had once written about being too visible in my own home. Now I understood visibility wasn't the enemy. It was being misread, seen only when convenient, invisible, when inconvenient, that broke a person. Carolyn asked if I wanted to file for a formal nonprofit. I told her I wasn't sure yet. Some things grow better in small pots. Stephanie emailed once through a mutual acquaintance. The message was curt, dressed up as concern. "Ellie asks about you sometimes. I tell her you're on a long vacation. I hope you're well." No apology, no admission, just a request disguised as a peace offering. I didn't respond. I printed the email and folded it in half, then half again. I dropped it in the recycling bin behind the library. Another woman in our group, Julia, brought in cupcakes the next week. She had just finalized her divorce from a man who told her she thought too much for someone with soft hands. We lit a candle on one of the cupcakes and let it burn down until the wax kissed the icing. No one made a wish. We didn't need to. The burn mark reminded me of the hole in my cardigan. I wore it again that evening, even though I had a new one in the closet. I returned home and placed my folder on the nightstand. It now held more than drawings, notes, plans, grant ideas. There was structure now, not just hope. I poured tea black this time and opened the window even though the air was cold. A few leaves drifted in from the fire escape. One landed on the table, trembling slightly from the draft. I looked at it for a long time before whispering, "Not to anyone in particular, I'm building again." Not a bakery this time, but a voice. And that time I let the silence answer back. I used to think closure came with sound, a door slamming, a voice breaking, someone shouting your name too late. But sometimes it's paper. Plain, folded, notarized. The court didn't need me in the room. I sat in a windowless office with a clerk who handed me a small recorder and a cup of water. I read my statement into the device slowly, like reading a recipe I'd never make again. They would play it during the closed hearing. I didn't ask when. I signed 3 forms afterward. No one looked me in the eye, but no one looked away either. A week later, an envelope arrived. Not hand-addressed, typed, neatly, tightly. Inside was an offer again. Mutual resolution, it said at the top. Below that, a proposed settlement of $25,000. In exchange, I would retract my testimony, issue a written statement claiming confusion due to medication and age, and agree to cease all contact with media, legal counsel, and the Whitaker family. At the bottom, a space for my signature. I didn't shred it. I didn't burn it. I placed it flat on the table, smoothed the corners, and stared at the empty line waiting for my name. Not out of doubt, but to understand the arrogance of assumption. They still believed silence could be bought. They thought I was someone who'd trade truth for a neat end. I met with Becky that afternoon. She didn't ask why I'd called. She just poured tea and handed me a pen. "I want to send something back," I told her. Her eyes didn't blink. "What exactly?" I placed a small folder between us. She opened it. First, a notarized letter declining any claim to property jointly held by or titled under the name of Jake Whitaker. No inheritance. No shared assets, no liabilities, nothing. Second, a formal statement relinquishing all ties of legal guardianship obligation or familial duty regarding the Whitaker household. Effective immediately and indefinitely. Third, a letter handwritten on the thick cream-colored paper I had been saving since before I left the house. My handwriting was slow now, with my wrist still stiff from the break. The letters tilted slightly to the left, but they were legible. More legible than anything they had ever heard from me before. "I do not belong to you anymore. You erased me once. I now choose to disappear on my terms." I sealed it all in a manila envelope. Becky slid her fingers along the flap, then nodded. "Registered mail?" she asked. "Signature required," I replied. At the post office, the line was short. A man ahead of me held a package wrapped in duct tape, murmuring into his phone about a return label. A child behind me asked his mother why stamps cost money. She didn't answer. When it was my turn, I handed the envelope across the counter. The clerk weighed it, stamped it, and held up a receipt. "Would you like to insure it?" she asked. "No," I said. As I stepped outside, the wind caught the edge of my scarf. I let it flutter behind me without adjusting it. The sun had shifted and the shadows on the sidewalk looked softer than usual, like even they were tired of clinging too tightly. Across the street, the number 14 bus idled near the curb. I didn't rush. I walked slowly, each step, measured not because I was weak, but because I had learned not to hurry toward things that didn't matter. In my bag was a printed sheet, a rough draft of the new logo for our circle. A child's hand, drawn in pencil palm open, surrounded by 5 smaller hands in muted pastel. Above it, the quiet should speak. I had shown it to the girls the day before. One of them, Mia, pointed at the smallest hand and whispered, "That one's mine." Then she traced the lines with her finger and said nothing more. That silence carried more than anything I'd read in all the affidavits and letters combined. Stephanie hadn't contacted me again. Not directly. But someone had left a message with the center receptionist asking to pass along a request if she could consider Ellie's future. What people might say. How children are sensitive. No name left. Just that. I didn't reply. Children are sensitive, yes, but not stupid. I still kept Ellie's old drawing tucked inside my journal. The colors had faded and the corners had curled from too much handling. She'd drawn me with purple hair and a big smile. I had never dyed my hair, and I couldn't remember the last time I smiled that wide. But she had imagined me that way once, and that meant something. That morning, before leaving for the post office, I had pinned the drawing above my bed. Next to it, a calendar page with a quote printed in bold. "You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm." I hadn't torn it down even after I'd read it a dozen times. Inside the bus, I found a seat by the window. The driver pulled away slowly, gently, like someone careful not to disturb a sleeping child. I didn't look back at the post office. There was nothing there for me anymore. My fingers traced the outline of the manila envelope still printed in my memory, not out of bitterness, but confirmation. It was done. Not loudly, not vengefully, but completely. I didn't need the money. I needed the air. And this time, it was mine. Some mornings I still reach for a second cup without thinking. Not because anyone's here to share it, but because the gesture stayed long after the people left. I boiled the water slowly, watching the steam rise in thin ribbons. The kettle gave off a low hum, not a whistle, just a quiet signal that something was ready. I poured into the same mug the one with the faint chip on the lip and the outline of an old sticker I'd never quite peeled off. 1 sugar cube black tea, no lemon, no stir. I liked the way the grains settled unevenly at the bottom. The table beneath was uneven too. I'd folded cardboard under one leg weeks ago, but it still tilted slightly if I leaned too far. I didn't fix it again. Some things were fine as they were unfinished, but mine. Ellie's postcard still clung to the corkboard above the radiator. A house with smoke from the chimney, a crooked welcome mat, and 3 stick figures, one in glasses, one with braids, and one with what looked like a pie. She had signed it. "We're okay. Are you still baking?" I hadn't answered that part. I didn't bake anymore, not really. But I had made scones last Thursday for the center's new group, and someone had said, "They taste like memory." That had been enough. The manuscript sat to my left. 2nd edition. The quiet should speak. The cover was darker now, the font plainer. I'd removed the photo. I didn't want a face there. I wanted space for someone to see themselves. I'd added a page inside just one for those who were never believed but kept breathing anyway. There were no names in the book. Not Jake's. Not Stephanie's. Not mine, really. Just moments described plainly, no climax, no vengeance, just what happened. Jake's case had resolved. Community service therapy sessions, no jail. The papers used words like reform first offense and unfortunate incident. I never read them fully. A lawyer from his side had sent one last envelope, a check unsigned, and a letter I didn't finish. I sent back a statement, simple notarized, I relinquish any legal tie to the estate of Jacob Whitaker. I forfeit claim name and guardianship. I am no longer of use to you. I am no longer yours. No further letters came after that. Stephanie had left quietly. Ellie moved with her. I heard they were in Oregon now by the coast. Once a month, a note arrived folded around a drawing. The last one had a bench beneath an apple tree and a cat that looked like my old tabby juniper. Ellie's letters never mentioned Jake. I never asked. The world had its debates. Talk radio, Twitter threads, anonymous comments. One said, "She broke her family for attention." Another wrote, "If my mom did that to me, I'd never forgive her." I didn't respond. The part of me that used to shrink under such words no longer stood close enough to flinch. At the center, our circle had grown. We had a stack of chairs, now a coffee tin for donations, and a small chalkboard sign the quiet should speak. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 4 to 6 p.m. We'd started writing prompts again. One girl wrote, "Silence can be shaped." Another, "I don't trust voices that come too fast." They didn't read them aloud. They didn't have to. A woman from the local community college came by once. She asked if I'd guest speak in her Narratives of Resilience course. I said I could come, but I wouldn't lecture. "I'll bring tea," I told her, "and stories that don't end neat." She smiled. That was enough. I declined television. A producer had called, offered airfare, a hotel, even makeup. "It's your moment," she'd said. But I didn't need a moment. I needed a morning. One like this. I opened the window above the radiator. The breeze touched my face, not cold, just sure of itself. A wind chime from the building next door jingled softly, spoons tied with fishing line. I listened. I didn't interpret. The bookshelf beside me had grown over the months. Most of the spines were soft-backed, underlined, and bent. A small bronze frame held a photo of me not from the papers, but one taken last fall, seated cross-legged on the library floor beside 3 children. I was not speaking. I was listening. Becky had sent me a lavender sachet with her last letter. "You chose you," it said. I placed it in the drawer beside my journal and the last postcard from Olivia. Hers read, "Your voice saved mine." I hadn't met her. I didn't plan to. Her words were enough. I brewed another cup. This time, no sugar. I liked the bitterness. It stayed longer on the tongue. I walked to the balcony with my notebook. Not the memoir, just pages for me. The chair creaked as it always did. I didn't brace myself. I sat fully. The sun had slipped just far enough behind the building that the light came sideways. It stretched across my feet, warm, even through socks. A pigeon landed on the railing, blinked twice, and flew off. I smiled but didn't follow it with my eyes. I opened the notebook. First page, blank. The pen moved slowly. I wrote. Today I made no one proud, and I was still enough. No signature, no flourish. I folded the notebook closed and placed it on my lap. The card from Ellie fluttered against the corkboard. I didn't tack it down. Some things are better left to drift. There were no steps in the hallway, no voices behind the wall, just the clink of a neighbor setting down a cup. I stayed there until the tea cooled, then longer. Nothing more needed proving. And I had stopped asking permission to exist.